Welcome to the deep dive. Picture yourself sitting in this totally sterile interview room.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right. Your palms are slightly sweaty. The hiring manager is leaning across the table looking at your resume, and they ask the inevitable question. So, why did you leave your last job?
The trap is set.
Exactly. Now, imagine you know for a fact that your previous employer was running a completely unethical operation. Do you tell the truth?
Well, according to the data we're looking at today, absolutely not.
Yeah, if you value your career, you lie. Because telling the blunt truth about a toxic employer will instantly cause about 30% of recruiters to just throw your resume straight in the trash.
It's wild.
Yep.
But it's true.
Today, we are pulling our source material straight from the Retrieving Thoughts blog. We're getting into a highly controversial reality of the professional world that, permeates every industry, but literally no one wants to talk about it out loud.
Right. We're digging into the massive, the asymmetrical double standard in recruitment.
So, to give you a quick overview of our mission today, we are going to pull back the curtain on why this recruitment game is so profoundly unbalanced.
We'll unpack the hidden power dynamics, look at the psychology of the hiring manager versus the candidate, and, try to figure out how you can actually navigate these unequal scales.
Yeah, whether you're the one holding the clipboard or the one sweating under the spotlight.
Exactly. And that opening stat you mentioned, it really sets the stage for this hidden architecture we navigate every time we change jobs. We all operate under these unspoken rules.
We carefully craft our narratives.
Right, but we rarely pause to deconstruct who actually designed the game or why the rules are weighted so heavily against the candidate.
The catalyst for this deep dive is a really striking story from the blog. It's about a software developer based in Copenhagen.
Ah, yeah, the Copenhagen story.
Yeah, he lost his job last November and has just been, pounding the pavement looking for a new role. But the twist is he isn't struggling because his code is bad.
Or because he lacks experience.
Right. He's struggling because he has to sit in these interviews and meticulously invent a smooth, diplomatic reason for leaving.
When the reality is his former employer was running the business unethically.
And his claims aren't just sour grapes. They are completely substantiated by independent reviews on Glassdoor, but he cannot say a word about it without torching his own chances.
The visual they provided in the source material perfectly captures this. It's an illustration of a man with a beard, rubbing his chin, looking at a golden scale of justice.
Right, the unbalanced scale.
Yeah, it's drastically, almost comically unbalanced. One side is just slammed all the way down to the table under this invisible weight.
So let's start by looking at the candidate side of that scale. Let's look at why honesty is penalized.
We can call this the interview trap.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the trap is disguised as just a polite inquiry, right? When they ask why you left, you're basically programmed to spin a positive narrative.
You smile, you make eye contact.
And you say you're, ready for new challenges or seeking growth opportunities.
Even if your former boss was an absolute nightmare.
Yes. A micromanaging nightmare who treated team meetings like personal therapy sessions. You just maintain the facade. You cannot speak ill of them.
Because the moment a candidate deviates from that script, a cognitive shift happens in the hiring manager's brain.
Oh, for sure.
Interviewers are wired to scan for risk. When you introduce negativity, they don't think, wow, that previous company sounds awful.
No, they instantly wonder if you are the problem.
Exactly. You get branded with the label of being toxic or difficult.
And this fear isn't just paranoia. The data actively supports it. Our sources highlight this graphic from SelectHub about screening interview red flags.
Which is fascinating to look at.
Right. Alongside obvious deal breakers like lack of genuine interest, there's a specific codified red flag: negative attitude towards previous employers.
It is institutionalized as a warning sign.
It really is. The studies show that exhibiting this specific behavior, just being honest about a bad past experience, diverts roughly 30% of recruiters.
1 in 3.
1 in 3 hiring managers will reject you on the spot. It's crazy.
To understand the psychology behind that drop-off, there's a revealing confession from the blog author's own time working at a game studio called Tactile.
Oh, I loved this part.
Yeah, so they were interviewing a very talented developer who had just survived this messy, highly publicized mass layoff in the Danish game industry.
Right. People were let go abruptly, terrible compensation.
Yeah, the entire industry knew the previous employer had behaved atrociously. So the interviewer already had the context. They knew the candidate was wronged.
But during the interview, the candidate just remained flawlessly professional.
Exactly. He didn't vent. He focused on what he learned. He played the game perfectly, and he got the job.
But the author's confession here is the real kicker.
Right. They admit that if the candidate had slipped up, if he had expressed completely justified frustration, they likely would have passed on him.
Just to avoid bringing drama onto the team.
It really exposes the mechanism of the trap. Hiring managers are fundamentally protecting their own team's ecosystem.
So they view a complaining candidate as a potential disruption.
Even if they intellectually know the candidate was treated unfairly, they're thinking, I just don't have the energy to manage this person's emotional baggage.
Okay, I get the fear of disruption, but why do we reward this forced corporate positivity?
What do you mean?
Well, the author uses this brilliant analogy about their dog, Hunter.
Oh, right, the barking dog.
Yeah, Hunter barks at everyone, delivery drivers, neighbors. He has a bad reputation.
Yeah.
But if the owner warns people about Hunter's quirks, hey, heads up, the dog barks, people consider that helpful information.
Sure, they appreciate the warning.
Exactly. So why are candidates forced to stay completely composed and protect a bad company's reputation? Warning the industry about unethical practices would actually be a public service.
Well, the dog analogy highlights the absurdity, sure. But it misses the fundamental power vacuum in the interview room.
How so?
Warning a neighbor is an exchange between equals. An interview is not. The candidate is incredibly vulnerable. They're asking for a livelihood. They just don't have the leverage to act as an industry informant.
Mm-hmm.
And that vulnerability leads us directly into the most controversial phase of the hiring process.
Oh, the reference check. This is where the scale doesn't just tip, it completely flips over.
It's a massive asymmetry.
It's infuriating. The candidate has spent weeks biting their tongue, smiling, talking about new challenges.
And then the former boss gets to jump on a private phone call.
Yes, a closed-door phone call where they can unleash unchecked criticism. They can say you struggled with deadlines or weren't a team player, and there is zero fact-checking.
I mean, legally, they have to avoid outright defamation.
But practically, as long as they use corporate speak, they have totally unregulated leeway to ruin your future. The source material talks about bitter startup CEOs who treat resignation as a betrayal.
Right, the founder ego.
Yeah, they hold a grudge and they can detonate your career in a 10-minute private chat. It's an outrageous system.
Okay, I have to push back here because you're looking at this purely through the lens of individual fairness.
Because it's unfair.
It is, but you're ignoring the macro reality of running a business. Companies operate in a constant state of risk mitigation.
Okay.
A bad hire is an expensive mistake. It drains resources, stalls projects. Hiring managers are desperate for unfiltered input because an interview is basically a performance.
But the reference isn't unfiltered, it's totally biased.
From the employer's perspective, the reference giver is a proxy for risk management. They are perceived as an authority providing objective insights.
Calling them objective is where the logic falls apart. They have defensive egos. And frankly, the whole thing is rigged anyway because candidates provide their own context.
Sure.
If I'm the candidate, I'm just going to call my favorite former colleague, buy them a beer, and tell them to give me a glowing review. The system doesn't generate objective truth.
It's an imperfect filter, I'll give you that. But think about the motivations. The candidate is a marketer. They are selling their labor. Any negativity they introduce hurts their own brand. The employer is the buyer trying to protect a massive investment. So they rely on the former boss because that person was the previous buyer of those services.
But the financial risk sits with the company, while the psychological risk is entirely borne by the worker.
It's a heavy burden, yet.
The blog makes this incredibly sharp comparison to online reviews. Think about it. If you buy a faulty product online, you as the customer can slam it with a one-star rant.
And the seller has to be polite.
Exactly. The business has to respond with complete diplomacy. If they rant back, they look crazy.
Right.
In recruitment, the candidate is the seller who must remain perfectly diplomatic, while the former boss gets to act as the angry customer, leaving a secret one-star review that the candidate can't even see.
That analogy really illustrates the claustrophobia candidate's experience.
Yeah.
The collateral damage is undeniable.
It breeds profound resentment. And worse, it traps people in toxic jobs. Imagine being under an abusive manager, but you can't leave because you're terrified that same manager will be the one giving your reference.
You stay out of sheer terror of retaliation. Yeah, that is the definition of a broken mechanism.
So we're both describing a fundamentally broken system. The question is, how do we fix it?
Well, the source material offers a fascinating approach, drawing from the author's background in game development.
Oh, right, the iteration concept.
Exactly. In game design, when a core mechanic feels unbalanced to the player, developers don't just throw the game away. They patch it. They tweak the variables and test it again.
Recruitment desperately needs that mindset. We need to patch this instead of clinging to these unstructured phone calls.
Let's look at the first major patch the author proposes: structured references.
I really like this idea.
Right now, a recruiter calls a former manager and asks open-ended, subjective questions. How was it working with Sarah?
Which is dangerous because it invites emotional memories.
Exactly. They aren't recalling data. They're recalling how Sarah made them feel on a stressful Tuesday 3 years ago.
So the solution is to force the conversation away from feelings into data.
By using specifically designed surveys, sort of like an agile, retrospective format.
You ask for measurable variables. What specific technical skills did they demonstrate? What were their measurable achievements?
Right. And when you force a potentially bitter manager into a fact-based format, you strip away their ability to comfortably assassinate a character.
Because it takes way more cognitive effort to falsify specific data points than to just offer a vague negative opinion.
Exactly. It acts as an emotional filter, but the second solution in the blog goes even further.
This is the one that really levels the playing field.
Yeah, cross-referencing those references with platforms like Glassdoor.
Oh, I got so excited reading this part. It gives the recruiter the crucial context they're missing. The sources provide this brilliant, specific example.
The April 2025 review.
Right, I have it right here, April 28th, 2025. It's a 2.0 star Glassdoor review left by an anonymous former employee. The title is Ominous: Questionable Choices of Future.
Catchy title.
Yeah, and what makes it so vital isn't just the low score. The employee actually praises the ground level work. They loved the studio, the immediate team culture, the project.
So they establish credibility by acknowledging the positives.
Exactly. But the breakdown happens when they address the C-suite. They point out these massive structural contradictions. The executives are closing studios and letting out talent, while those same studios are severely understaffed.
They highlight a deep instability driven by management.
Now, imagine a recruiter in Copenhagen interviewing a candidate who just left that exact studio.
Right.
The recruiter does a reference check and speaks to a former manager who happens to sit in that scrutinized C-suite. The executive gives a bad reference, saying the candidate struggled with adaptability.
Under the old rules, a recruiter takes that as objective truth and rejects the candidate.
They become part of that 30% statistic. But if the recruiter implements the second patch, if they cross-reference the Glassdoor reviews, their whole framework shifts.
They read that 2.0 star review.
And suddenly, the poor reference isn't objective truth anymore. The recruiter realizes the executive might just be a defensive manager trying to cover up their own poor leadership.
Retaliating against an employee who saw the sinking ship, it completely flips the narrative.
It forces the employer to be held accountable for their own reputation in the marketplace.
It does. Now, implementing structured surveys and cross-referencing demands more effort from the hiring manager.
Oh, definitely.
They can't just rely on a 10-minute phone call. But if their genuine goal is risk mitigation and securing the best talent, verifying data through multiple lenses is vastly superior.
We have dissected a massive amount of hidden workplace mechanics today. Let's pull these threads together into our key takeaways.
Sounds good.
First, the recruitment scale is heavily tipped against you, the job seeker. Candidates are penalized for honesty about bad employers, diverting 30% of recruiters. Meanwhile, former bosses wield unchecked power in private reference calls.
Second, this asymmetry is rooted in conflicting motivations. The employer is focused on risk mitigation, needing unfiltered input. The candidate is forced into self-marketing, where any negativity damages their value.
And finally, the fix requires an iterative approach. Recruiters need to abandon open-ended calls for structured, fact-based surveys and cross-reference claims against independent company reviews.
To make sure they aren't rejecting top talent based on a bitter boss's bias.
Exactly. Now, if you want to dive into the full story of the Copenhagen developer or look at the Select Hub data yourself, the link to the full article is in the description.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. We've talked about how recruiters can patch the system, but what if job seekers flip the script entirely?
Oh, I like where this is going.
Reputation is a two-way street, right?
Huh.
So think about your next job hunt. What if, before you ever accepted an offer, you demanded the contact info for the last 3 people who quit that team?
Wow.
What if you insisted on doing your own rigorous reference check on your future manager?
Imagine the absolute shock on a hiring manager's face if you ask for their references.
It would completely change the vulnerability dynamic.
It really would. It might be the exact bold move required to finally balance the scale. Thank you for taking this deep dive into the source material with us today, and we will catch you on the next one.